Awesome. Well, thank you, Andrew. So first of all, good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. I think this is a really interesting kind of topic to talk about. But like Andrew said, my name is John Pulley. I serve as one of our senior assistant directors here in the Office of Admissions here at JMU. I also serve as one of the admissions counselors for Northern Virginia. I oversee select public schools throughout Fairfax County, and as well as the Arlington and Alexandria areas. With that being said, though, I've overseen Fairfax for couple years now, but I also oversaw a couple of different regions in my past experience as well. So I started at JMU in 2020. My first 2 years, I oversaw New England and upstate New York. I also had Pennsylvania as my region before moving into Northern Virginia. So I've worked with a lot of different schools, worked with a lot of different curriculums, and I think that has kind of allowed me to see a lot of the different kind of aspects that go into creating a strong academic schedule. In terms of today, Andrew mentioned it. We will be kind of diving into crafting a strong schedule throughout high school, but mainly I do want to kind of touch on what we specifically here at JMU are looking for in terms of academic progressions, in terms of what is going to make an applicant or what is going to make a student a strong applicant to our university. So I want to briefly kind of touch on the basics of what we look for in terms of the academic record. I also want to touch on a couple of different kind of frequently asked questions that I've heard either through past webinars that we've had or just from my interactions with counselors. I want to be able to touch on some of those frequently asked questions that you all run into as you're assisting students with preparing their upcoming schedules for the upcoming year. But really, I think the main thing is that there's a lot of different kind of details, a lot of different kind of case-by-case basis things that come up when you are assisting students. So even though I can give kind of a broad overview, myself, Andrew, and Adam will do our best to answer any questions that come in. But ultimately, there's going to be those kind of one-off situations that we're not going to have the answer to right now. The reason for that, or the big thing I would recommend, is getting to know who your admissions counselor is. So based on where you go to high school, based on where you are from, you have an admissions counselor within our office that is there to be your main point of contact. So whenever you do run into any kind of one-off kind of area, whether you're working with a student and you might need some assistance, I definitely recommend reaching out to your admissions counselor because they're going to be able to kind of advise you based on those situations. And I think Andrew and Adam, they're going to put a link to the website where you can figure out who your admissions counselor is. So definitely recommend that. That's really our whole job, is to kind of help you all and help students with this process. And we really truly value everything that you do. And we see you as our partners on the other side of the desk. So definitely let us know if you have any questions. But with that, I will go ahead and share my screen. It all goes smoothly. Figure hopefully everything looks good. Feel free to interrupt me if there's any issues. But as you can see on the slide, I want to touch on the core curriculum kind of expectations that we here at JMU are typically looking for when it comes to strong applicants each year. This is really going to kind of vary from institution to institution. So with you all, as you're working with students, it's definitely important to kind of ask those questions of what different colleges might be looking for. But we try to keep our process as straightforward as we can. But like I said, every school is going to be different. Every curriculum is going to be a little bit different. So it's one of those we kind of handle things on a case-by-case basis. But starting off, core academic areas, these are the kinds of things that we're looking for in competitive applicants. So the first is going to be 4 years of an English class. And typically that's going to be a consistent requirement, whether it's applicants from Virginia or out of state. 4 years is typically what we're going to be looking for when it comes to the English progression. The next one listed is math. Math is going to be a very important factor for us when it comes to our review process. With our general education requirements, all of our students coming in are going to be taking a math class. And in order to be successful, we really need to see students that have completed a math beyond the Algebra 2 level in high school. Typically what that looks like, usually it's going to be something along the lines of like a pre-calculus course, probability and statistics, discrete math. it really will kind of vary, but I think the kind of blanket rule that we have is that usually the highest math that we want to see in high school for a competitive applicant needs to have Algebra 2 as a sole prerequisite. So obviously, if students get up to kind of the AP level or college level coursework within the math progression, those are usually going to be acceptable. But usually we need to see a math that has Algebra 2 listed as a sole prereq. Some of the wonky kind of maths that we run into are the ones that require, for example, Algebra 2 or algebraic functions data analysis. If it has that or in there, that's where it can get a little bit tricky. We really need to see the Algebra 2 completion in addition to the math beyond that level. With that being said, the highest math can be during senior year. I think that's a common question that will sometimes come up, is whether they need to have the level beyond Algebra 2, whether that needs to be completed before senior year, before they apply. That's really not the case. So typically a lot of students will go through Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and then they'll be in pre-calculus during their senior year. Even though we don't have that final grade yet, we still view that as completing a math beyond Algebra 2. Because ultimately we're going to see all of the final transcripts for any students that matriculate to JMU. When it comes to the lab science, when it comes to our Virginia applicants, typically what we're looking for with the core academic progressions is going to fall in line with the Advanced Studies diploma for Virginia. I think because that diploma is available, typically we know that students have those types of courses available. So that's why for our process for Virginia applicants, we usually want to see 4 years of a lab science. When it comes to lab science, usually it's going to be a science it needs to be a science that has a lab component. Lab science is one of those. There's a lot of different kind of iterations and different options for students to look into, but really for us, we're not too focused on the specific progression. We just want to see that there are 4 years of a science that have a lab component. And then when it comes to out of state, usually 3 years is acceptable. That's usually what we're looking for. Social studies, that's usually going to be pretty broad, but usually we want to see 4 years of that. And social studies usually doesn't cause too many issues when it comes to the review process because there are so many classes that really kind of fall under the social studies umbrella. And then finally, when it comes to foreign language, again, like I said, with the Advanced Studies diploma for Virginia applicants, we really typically want to see 3 to 4 years of a single foreign language or the 2+2. Usually 3 or 2+2 is perfectly acceptable. One thing I want to mention, this is another kind of common question that comes up, is whether we're looking for years in high school or whether we are looking for the level. When it comes to our process, again, this may vary from institution to institution, but for our process, we're looking at the level. So sometimes we'll see a lot of students will take Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 in middle school, and then they will take Spanish 3 in 9th grade. We will see Spanish 3 in 9th grade, and we're going to assume that they have the Spanish 1 and the Spanish 2. So it's not specifically years in high school. We're specifically looking for that level. So for applicants from Virginia, we're looking for the 3 or the 2+2. Usually for our out-of-state applicants, we just want to see at least 2 years of one foreign language. Again, we kind of take the graduation requirements into consideration. All students are always reviewed based on the context of their high school, but typically that's kind of where our line falls. So Virginia applicants, we want 3 or the 2+2. And then for applicants outside of Virginia, usually 2 years is acceptable in terms of our admissions process. So those are kind of the main kind of core area progression notes that we are usually looking for. The other kind of important aspect that we look for is that we are looking for a rigorous course load based on the curriculum available to the student at their high school. Typically, to be competitive, we want to see students that have a mix of college and honors level coursework throughout high school. I talk to students about it. Ultimately, those more advanced courses are going to best prepare students for the academic experience at JMU and at the college level. So that's really why the college and honors level coursework are going to be very important to our process. But you all may have interacted and kind of heard these tips and tricks before, but balance is really going to be key when it comes to figuring out AP, IB, dual enrollment, honors, figuring out the balance of a rigorous course load while also maintaining academic success. It really kind of varies from school to school in terms of like how many college or honors level coursework courses we might be looking for. But the balance is really the main thing. I always recommend to students whenever I do panels, I just tell them that, look, you want to be able to challenge yourself with these courses, but it also doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you're taking all of these rigorous courses, but then not doing well in the classes. So the main thing, program of study, we're looking for a rigorous course load based on what's available at the high school. And then we're specifically looking at the final grades received in the core academic classes that I had just talked about earlier. Usually to be competitive, we want to see mostly A's and B's within the core areas. A couple C's here and there are fine. It's usually my approach when I'm talking to students. I would rather see mix of A's and B's, maybe a C or two here, here or there in a rigorous course load, compared to having straight A's in a not very rigorous course load. So again, it kind of goes to the balance. But I also usually say if there are a couple of C's on the transcript, we usually want to see A's to kind of balance those out. D's and F's, I would really avoid having D's or F's on the transcript. Those are always kind of things that we are going to note with our review process. But again, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. A D in middle school might not be as bad compared to a D in sophomore or junior year. And especially if we don't want the progressions to be disrupted in any way. So if retaking a D or an F is going to disrupt a core area progression, that's something where it becomes kind of a case-by-case basis. But as a blanket statement, D's and F's, I would definitely just try to avoid those. So I briefly talked about the college level coursework, AP, IB, dual enrollment. A common question that comes up is whether we have a preference between those different options. When it comes to the admissions process, we don't weigh AP, IB, dual enrollment. We don't weigh them lower or higher compared to each other. We really view all of those as college level courses. So in terms of the admissions process, we don't have too much of a preference, but I do think it may be important to kind of ask the student and figure out what is going to be the best fit for the student. I know for transfer credit, we do have the transfer equivalency guide on our website that students can look up to figure out if and how dual enrollment classes are going to transfer. And then when it comes to AP and IB classes, that is going to depend on the test score. So if students are trying to decide between dual enrollment or AP, if they're considering wanting to get transfer credit, that's a component that they may want to keep in mind when they're making that decision. But in terms of the admissions process, we don't weigh them any differently in a way. I will say, I did harp on a lot with the core academic classes. When it comes to AP and IB classes, since those are standard curriculums that we know, we will usually give students credit for core and non-core AP or IB classes. So classes like AP Art, IB Exercise Science, Visual Arts, we'll usually give students credit for those classes and consider them college level courses. But that is the one kind of difference from dual enrollment. Dual enrollment, we are specifically and strictly looking at the core areas. So any non-core dual enrollment, those classes aren't going to have a large impact on our admissions process. So that's our general approach. You can see on the bottom, majors are not a factor in our admissions decisions. So students can have their intended major, and they do list that on the application, but it doesn't play a role with our process. So in terms of crafting a schedule and working with your students to figure out what the best schedule is going to be for them, that might be another thing to keep in mind as well. When it comes to JMU, we aren't looking for specific classes that fall in line with the student's intended major, but other institutions and other colleges may be looking for certain classes. So if a student is applying to an institution that that admits by major and they're applying to an engineering class, they may need to kind of get up to like the physics or higher level math classes. That's an important conversation that should be had with the students as they're crafting their schedules. But for JMU, we're not looking for anything in particular. We're just looking for students that are excelling and challenging themselves within the core areas. I think with that, those are my only 2 slides. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Let's see. So I think that kind of covers the main kind of things that we are looking for when it comes to admissions. I did want to kind of transition and talk a little bit about some frequently asked questions and frequent things that come up regarding crafting schedules. This is a recent one that kind of came up with some of my counselors, but online classes versus in-person classes. How do we kind of take that into consideration? When it comes to us, we don't typically look at online and in-person too much differently in terms of the actual admission and application review process. If we see students take an online AP Stats course or something along those lines, we're not going to give them less credit for completing AP Stats. I think with online classes, we'll consider them pretty equally, but I think the important thing for you all in your roles is figuring out what is going to be best for the student. If creating a foundation in one of kind of the early level classes is going to be important for the student that is pursuing a specific major, it might be important to figure out, are they going to build a strong foundation in an online setting or an in-person setting? That's the kind of thing that might be worth talking about if a student is considering online classes. But in terms of the admissions process, we're not going to look at it online versus in person. We're not going to look at those differently. Same goes for like summer classes. Summer classes, typically they're going to be a much kind of shortened, quicker version. Again, I think it goes back to what kind of foundation does the student want within whatever class that they're taking. This was like an example that came up. If a student is interested in pursuing the STEM areas, or they're looking into like pre-pharmacy, and they want to take their first year chemistry class over the summer, that might be something to kind of keep in mind. Are they really going to get that chemistry foundation that is so important to their career goals and their future goals? Do they want that foundation to be a summer or shortened class? That's something that might be worth talking about as well. But I think, again, when it comes to summer classes, we're not going to view those as less than the semester or yearly classes. If we see that they completed AP Stats over the summer, we'll give them credit for the AP Stats when it comes to the admissions process. Let's see, another question that came up last year. What are we looking for from schools that may not have an abundance of college level or honors level coursework? Again, I briefly mentioned it earlier. Students are reviewed based on the context of their high school. We're looking at students that we're looking at the curriculum that is available to the students, and we are making a determination of whether they challenge themselves within that available curriculum. So I mentioned it earlier, I oversaw all of New England and upstate New York for my first 2 years working at JMU, and I ran into many, many different schools that did not offer your typical AP, IB, or honors classes, and we take that into consideration. If there's really no differentiation in terms of like the levels of classes, we'll look at those core academic progressions and make a determination of whether students have challenged themselves there. But again, I think that's an important question for your admissions counselor. All of us within the admissions office, it is really our job to kind of get to know your school's curriculum and determine what a rigorous course load is for your school. So could be a good question if you wanted to kind of get details of what we are specifically looking for in applicants from your school. That's a good question that you can reach out to your admissions counselor for. Another question that came up last year, stopping foreign language in 9th grade at level 3. What does that look like if they kind of stop their foreign language progression early on in high school? In terms of the core area progressions, if they're meeting the 3 years or the 2+2 or the 2 years for our out-of-state applicants, it doesn't have an impact in terms of our review process. With that being said, there is the component of taking a rigorous course load. Typically, students, if they go beyond the Spanish 3 level, if they're going into Spanish 4, Spanish 5, and I'm using Spanish as an example, but this also relates to any other foreign languages. But if students are getting up to like Spanish 4, Spanish 5, we'll consider those as almost like honors level coursework. So even though they've already met the core area progression, going into those higher level classes is going to be beneficial in terms of boosting the rigor of the high school transcript. On the flip side of that, I also think it might come up pretty frequently that students might be more interested in certain areas. If a student is interested in going into the STEM field and they're much more of like a math science type of person, I think it's generally pretty acceptable if they wanted to really challenge themselves within the math and science classes throughout high school. Maybe they don't need to take as challenging courses within the social sciences or the English. I think that is kind of a reasonable approach to things. But again, we are looking at the entire core academic, all of the core academic areas throughout high school. So that's kind of, again, going back to the balance that they need to find. So we're not looking for anything particular in terms of college or honors level coursework within those different core area progressions. But that's another kind of common question that comes up. And then the last comment, the last frequently asked question that I wanted to kind of touch on is 3-year graduates. What is our kind of approach to that? How do we look at that? When it comes to students that want to graduate a year early, I think there are a lot of benefits to making that decision. But the thing to kind of keep in mind is that with those students, we're usually going to hold them to the same standard that we are holding other applicants from the school during that year. So essentially, students who are graduating in 3 years, we are still going to be looking for a rigorous course load, and we're holding it to the same level that we're reviewing our applicants who are doing the full 4 years, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm explaining that super well, but students that are graduating in 3 years, they really need to make sure that they have challenged themselves very, very well within those 3 years. I think we run into issues when we see students that graduate in 3 years where they didn't take as many college or honors level courses because they have a one less year of coursework. But so we're still going to kind of hold them to that same standard. And then obviously the academic, the core area progressions, that's going to be another thing to keep in mind as well. We're still going to be looking for the year beyond Algebra 2, still looking for 3 years of a foreign language or 2+2, or the 2 years for out of state. We're still looking for all of those same core area progressions, regardless of whether a student is graduating in 3 years or 4. So that's something to keep in mind. There may be a lot of kind of benefits to the 3-year grads, but there are some instances where it may become a problem if they don't have as much built into those 3 years. So I think those were kind of the main things I wanted to touch on. Again, I think your admissions counselor is a very valuable asset to you in terms of being a resource. We really want to be able to help you with your job. We really try to make our position as transparent as we can. So we're happy to provide any feedback throughout the process. But again, there's a lot of kind of case-by-case things that come up. So definitely reach out to your admissions counselor. But I think those were kind of the main things that I wanted to touch on. But at this point, I think we'll transition and we can kind of jump into the Q&A. I know we have a couple questions that came in.
Yes, thank you, John, for that presentation aspect of the webinar. We are going to transition into the Q&A chat. So if you have any questions that you are wanting to have answered during this time, please use the Q&A function at the bottom. It's around the right side of your screen to submit any questions. We do have some in the chat box as well, but if you can use the Q&A function, I'd prefer that. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the question to John. just as the presenter for the day, even though all of us could answer these questions. So the first one I do want to touch on just because, John, I know you were just recently talking about this. So I'm gonna have two because they kind of go hand in hand. So this one person asks, they have or talks about having a lot of bilingual students that earn several world language credits. Are they expected to take 3 years of Spanish or any language, even though they're fluent Spanish speakers? Basically, would they be penalized if they are earning world language credit but didn't take the 3 to 4 years of a language? First part, and then the second part deals with waivers. If a student has a language waiver, how does that impact them in our admissions process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is definitely another common thing that will come up. When it comes to students that are bilingual, we will take that into consideration. I think that, like I said, the general blanket rule is the 3 or 2+2 or the 2 for out of state. But if we see students that take like the foreign language test and they receive kind of the passing credits for the world language, and we can see that on the transcript, then we will then we know that they are proficient within that language, and we won't hold them to needing the 3 or the 2+2 or the 2. I think same generally goes. Same generally goes for ESL students. So students that are bilingual and they're taking ESL classes throughout high school or kind of early on in high school, that's something that we'll take into consideration as well, because we will know that English is their second language, so that we know that they are proficient in another language as well. So basically, yes, we will take that into consideration if there is kind of if they have those world language credits or if they're ESL, then we're not going to hold them to the 3 or the 2+2. I think on the flip side of that, when it comes to the foreign language waiver, I think a lot of times we see this when it comes to students that have accommodations for whatever it may be. They may receive a foreign language waiver where they don't need to take the foreign language in order to receive whatever diploma they're going for. We will take that into consideration. I think that's definitely a good thing for students and you all as you're putting together counselor recommendations. That's something we like to see if a student did receive a world language waiver. We will take that into consideration. But generally, we will still be looking for some level of foreign language, if that makes sense. If they don't have any foreign language or world language, but they have a waiver, we'll keep that in mind. But it's not necessarily waived in our admissions process, if that makes sense. But we'll kind of give a little bit of leeway, I guess, when it comes to the waivers.
Awesome. Yes, thank you, John. The other thing that I want to add to what John was saying about the like the bilingual students or potentially students who are English second language is right. He's correct in the sense that we recognize that they are learning a language and they have that credit, but also we see it sometimes as English is their language requirement. So it's where students will take Spanish as a world language for classes. For those students whose Spanish is their first language and English is their second language, English can be seen almost as their world language. So I do want to put that out to kind of better help you all understand like why we look at it in that way and how we view that in the context of bilingual or multi-language speaking students. Also in the chat, I do want to mention someone asked a question about senior year schedules with only 2 classes. It was answered in the chat, but I'm going to just raise it in the webinar here. If a student just has 2 classes their senior year, math and English, it's true. As long as they're meeting all of our requirements, the 3 to 4 years in all core academic areas, they're doing the year beyond Algebra 2, it's fine. But kind of to John's point earlier, we want to see that progression still. So if it means that they're not taking those rigorous courses, the AP, the honors courses, the IB, dual enrollment classes, that might be something to consider there. But if they have everything that they need in terms of what we're looking for, having a lesser schedule isn't going to be the be all end all. But I do want to point in that direction that, what are they taking? How much rigor do they have in the 3 years prior? Because that might be something that should be considered as well.
And that
Um,
also kind of ties into how we're viewing things like study hall, early release, those types of things. It's essentially the same thing that Andrew just said, where we're not going to fault students for having those types of things on the transcript, whether it's study hall or early release. We're not faulting students for that, but again, we are looking for the rigorous course load. So we want to see students challenging themselves. If a student has challenged themselves throughout high school, they have different college honors level courses throughout high school, and they have challenged themselves to the point where they are competitive for admission, then it's totally fine for them to see, for us to see like a study hall or an early release or something along those lines. But again, it comes back to we want to see students challenging themselves. If they're taking the study hall or early release, it's potentially taking away a spot for a course that may boost the rigor of their transcript.
all right, John, the next question I have here is, does a dual credit grade impact their GPA at JMU when they enroll? So I think this person's asking if they have dual enrollment credit, does that impact, like, I'm assuming when they enroll into classes? And correct me if I'm wrong. But if you could answer it in that regard, how does it impact maybe when they choose classes when they enroll at JMU, if it does?
Good question. I was looking for it in the chat and couldn't see it, so I was trying to figure out. Okay, so if they're coming in with dual enrollment credit, does it impact when they're able to register for classes? I believe early on, I don't think it has an impact in terms of like the timeline of registering for classes. I think all students, regardless of whether they're coming in with an associate's degree or just a lot of dual enrollment credit, they're still going through the normal first year orientation process. So I think that generally they are going to be registering during the similar timeline to the other first year students. That may change kind of as they progress. If the Office of the Registrar completes the credit evaluation and they are academically a sophomore or a junior, they may get bumped up a little bit. But my understanding is I don't think it has too large of an impact in terms of like the first year registration process. And Adam and Andrew, if you heard something different, you can let me know. But I don't think it will have an impact.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Yeah, that's kind of how I have heard of it as well. The same person that asked that question asked if they failed the class, would they be on academic probation? Does that grade essentially follow them throughout college?
Yeah, I think like if they failed a dual enrollment class in their senior year, I think what happens with that is that they wouldn't be placed on academic probation. I think it just means that they would not receive transfer credit for that class. I think that's how the Office of the Registrar goes about those types of situations, but I don't think a student coming in would be placed on academic probation for a dual enrollment class that they took outside of JMU. I think it just impacts the ability for it to actually transfer.
Yeah. The next question is, if students complete an IB math sequence in junior year, do you want to see them math their senior year?
Not necessarily. I think if a student completes the IB math sequence, they're well beyond kind of the Algebra 2 level that we're looking for. And we don't need to see a math in senior year. Like I said, I think if we see like Algebra 2 in like freshman year or taken the summer before freshman and sophomore year, we're going to assume that they have the Algebra 1, the geometry, the Algebra 2, and then the 2 years of IB math after that. So they're meeting what we are looking for in terms of the math progression. They're getting that college level coursework that is going to boost the rigor of their transcript. So in that type of case, we don't necessarily need to see the math in 12th grade. But if there's a math that they want to take, that if it's like a college level, that's obviously going to boost the rigor as well. But it's not going to be a necessity.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And kind of to piggyback off of that, one of the questions is, for math beyond Algebra 2, do we care what math it is, or do you prefer to see specific math like trigonometry or pre-calc? To kind of chime in here, because we've talked about it a couple times already. We do not care what math it is, as long as on the course catalog or somewhere we can find it, it says that the sole prerequisite course to take that class is Algebra 2. So a lot of times it does come down to the trigonometries, the pre-calculus, the calculus, the stats. But if you had a math like Algebra 3 or Algebra 3 trig or um, discrete math, those are maths that typically count as well. So we don't necessarily have a preference for what it is. It's just, again, it has to meet that prerequisite of Algebra 2. What that looks like at your schools can differ. And again, the regional counselor that is overseeing your school will be in the know about what classes do and do not count. Or we will reach out if we need to know whether or not it counts or not. And again, it's all within the context of the high school. So we don't necessarily care what math they take beyond Algebra 2 as long as Algebra 2 is that sole prerequisite course. So it doesn't have to be trig or pre-calc per se. It just needs to meet that requirement for us.
Yeah. And generally that is the rule, and we tend to be pretty strict on it. But our admissions counselors work with a lot of different schools. There may be certain exceptions here and there. So that's why we would definitely recommend, if there's one that you are curious about of whether it's a math that we accept, definitely reach out to your admissions counselor and we can be kind of transparent with you. Kind of branching off of that question a little bit, Andrew answered it pretty spot on. I think when it comes to what we are looking for in the math beyond Algebra 2, we don't have a preference, whether it's stats or whether it's pre-calculus or whether it's getting up to like a college level math. We don't have a preference. But if students are looking into other institutions that might be admitting by major or might be looking for certain things, that's where it might be good to kind of advise students in a certain direction. So if a student is looking into I don't know, engineering or like business major, that kind of thing. Calculus might be the best kind of route to go down. I know for like our business majors, they take a business calculus class. So having that calculus background can be very beneficial. It doesn't have a role with our process, but I know other institutions will take that into consideration, where if a student is applying for a specific major, they may want to see a student who has a background in calculus. So pre-calc might be the route to go down. Same goes for like lab science too. I know a lot of students, if they're looking into going into kind of the STEM areas, or if they're looking into like biology, for example, some colleges who admit by major may want to see students that are getting up to like the AP Bio level, or like AP chemistries. It really kind of, again, case by case basis, but some colleges may be looking for certain classes, but for our process, we don't have a preference. But as you're advising students who may be applying to a variety of different colleges, that is something to keep in mind as well.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you, John. The next question is not necessarily based on creating a strong schedule, but it is a question that came into the chat. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A chat function. We would love to answer them. But this next question is do we review applicants on a rolling basis each week, or do we hold off until a particular deadline?
Yeah. So for our admissions process, we're not rolling admission. So we have our early action non-binding deadline, which is November 1st, and then regular decision, that deadline is January 15th. Both of them are non-binding. So it's not a rolling application process. We're not really reviewing applications as they come in. Internally, like we may start reviewing applications maybe a bit before the deadline, just so we can kind of get a head start on reading the applications that were submitted early. But ultimately, it's not a rolling process. Same goes for decision release. All of the early action decisions are released at the same time. And then same with the regular decision applications. All of those decisions are released at the same time. So it's definitely not like a rolling basis.
Yeah, thank you, John. Once again, I'm just going to put it out there. If you have any questions, we can wait a couple more minutes to see if any others come in. But I'm also going to put in the chat again the link to our contact your counselor page, so that if you do have any questions after today, you can reach out to your specific geographic admissions counselor who will be best able to help you. Again, this counselor is someone who's been assigned to your specific geographic region, so they are going to be, for better or for worse, the expert on that area in your high school. So if there is, something that, we might not know that you want us to know about a student applicant or your course structure, you can reach out to us. If a student has a question about, if this progression of lab science, social science, math, English looks good, reach out to us. This is why we're here. We're here to help advise students as well as counselors to help you all with your jobs as well. We're willing to have those conversations to help students, create a senior year schedule, a junior year schedule, so that they're setting themselves up right, so that if they want to apply to JMU, they are being the most competitive as they possibly can. So we're more than happy to set up those phone calls or emails with students and you all as counselors as well. So there's the link to that. If you are a Virginia counselor, some of this might be a little bit more confusing to find us. So you might have to click on our little function at the bottom to see where you're located in Virginia so that you can find our counselor. Because again, both John and I have parts of Northern Virginia, but he has the Fairfax public schools and I have certain counties and the private schools. So you just need to find which counselor is the one for your specific school. But if there are no other questions, I do want to just say thank you to all of you for coming today, spending 45 minutes to an hour with us, listening to what we look for in terms of creating a strong schedule and how to best set up your students for being competitive applicants for JMU. As you all are part of the counselor education program, we thank you for your support every month, every webinar, every newsletter. There should be a newsletter that comes out in the next week or so. So be on the lookout for that. Adam and I are going to be working on our March installment of that. And then our next webinar should be set up again in the next month or so, so that you all can join that. We'll have a link for you all to register, and you'll get that email with the registration link when that comes out. But thank you all for coming. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday, great rest of your week. And then if you have any questions for us, again, please feel free to reach out to us. John, thank you so much today for agreeing to be the presenter. You brought a lot of wealth of information that I'm sure everyone was very appreciative of. So thank you for your time as well. But without further ado, I am going to end the live. So thank you all for coming and have a great day.